It's a moment a lot of owners can remember if they're honest about it. Something went sideways, a decision needed to be made, and the team hesitated, or they even made the wrong call, and the owner stepped in, fixed it, and moved on. It felt like the right thing to do, and it probably was in that moment, but something happens that nobody talks about when we step in as owners and solve the problem. The team will be watching, and what they learned wasn't how to handle it better the next time. They learned that when things get a little difficult, when things go wrong, the owner comes back in to solve the problem, to save our rears. So that's not a lesson that's taught in a meeting. It is taught when we show up and how we show up as owners of a business. And I keep seeing this. Owners that they want to step back. They want to delegate more. They want to stay out of the day-to-day. They want to make real progress. But then something fails, something happens. A client complains, a client cancels a contract, a quarter didn't turn out as expected. And the owner just steps right back in to solve the problem through brute force. And every time that happens, something shifts quietly. The team will start waiting again, not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, because the system just was reinforced. The system of waiting for the owner was just reinforced every time that happens. And here's a conversation I had a few weeks ago. An owner, he'd been in the business for many years, clever guy, and he had tried over and over to step back. The team was actually more independent than it had been for a while, but a big client had just canceled a big contract. And that was, significant enough for the owner to feel it. It wouldn't, in the long run harm his business. He would be fine, but it was enough to create enough fear to the owner that he jumped straight back in, joined every call, reviewed every proposal, made himself available around the clock until they had found a new client and replaced the revenue. And 6 months later, he was still more involved in the business that he'd been in years. And he didn't really understand why. So I asked what had shifted, what had changed. And he thought about for a moment, probably when I lost that client, he said. And what did your team learn from that, I asked. He went a little quiet. Well, the team hadn't learned to respond better to client loss. They had learned that pressure and challenges was the owner's domain. When the stakes was real, the owner would be there as their safety net to rescue them, to bail them out. So they waited, not because they were lazy, because they waited because the system had taught them to do so. Hey, if stuff goes wrong, the boss will come in and fix it for us. And that's probably the last thing we want to teach anybody. So essentially what happens is every time we step in, you're teaching something. It's not always the wrong lessons. Sometimes you do need to step in and do the right thing. But every time you do it, you're basically sending a signal who runs what in the business. Basically saying that as the owner, you will run the business if things doesn't go exactly right. And over time, those behaviors and signals becomes the operating system. The team that keeps bringing decisions back to you didn't decide to be dependent. They were trained to do so gradually by 1,000 small moments when you were available and capable and faster than waiting to see what happened. You weren't really doing anything wrong. You were solving those problems, and that's what good operators do. But every solution that you provided as an owner taught the business that you were the solution. Not the system, not the proper processes, not the people, but you were the solution for every problem. And the uncomfortable part isn't that it happened, is that you allowed it, you built it. Not out of purpose, not out of weakness, but you still created it. Which means, you can also build something different, something that's worth sitting with you before you do anything else. And if any of this lands, if you see the moments where you're stepping in and something shifts, it might be worth looking at what's actually created in your business. So I do a quick 30-minute owner constraint diagnostics where we find, a single constraint that keeps your business dependent on you. You leave it a clear picture and the next 3 moves. No pits, just clarity. The link is in the description. And if you want this kind of thinking in your inbox every Tuesday, the newsletter link is there as well. Hey, subscribe if this is useful. See you next week.